Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm usually the person behind the scenes, but it is today my great pleasure to introduce my friend and, in this particular case, co-worker who has been leading our charge and being a consummate host for us all so far. My good friend and the leader here at Shameless Sexuality Conference, Miss Janice Selbie. She's a registered professional counselor and religious recovery consultant. She is the founder of the Conference on Religious Trauma and this Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture Conference. She's developer of the Divorcing Religion Workshop and host of the Divorcing Religion podcast. In her talk, Moving from Shamed to Shameless, Janice will share how purity culture impacted her personally and offers some practical steps for overcoming sexual shame. And please join me in welcoming my friend Janice Selbie.
Oh, thanks, Heather. That's delightful. Hi, everyone. Now I get to be in the hot seat and have all the nerves and anxiety about presenting. So I did put together a PowerPoint, and Sunny, you can put on that first slide there just with some information about me. So my talk is called Moving from Shamed to Shameless, and this session does include a discussion around sexual assault, just so that you know ahead of time. For a lot of people, the 1970s were a time of anything goes. But not at my house. At 785 Cactus Road in British Columbia, the 70s were a time of obedience and chastity. Being the youngest sibling, I was eager to please my parents and everyone else. I was sickeningly sweet as I tried my best to be a good Christian girl. Adults loved me, but my peers, not so much. Sunny, you can put on the slide of me with my siblings. I'm the one with the short hair. Steeped in evangelical Christianity from birth, I believed Jesus and God were with me all the time, watching over me, taking notes of any unbefitting behavior. If I heard there might be a fight after school, I made sure my teachers knew about it. If bullies were making little kids cower, I was there in a flash, reminding them to behave. Teachers would ask me to befriend new students. None of this was disingenuous behavior for me. I really was innocent and kind and quite serious. It earned me great comments on my report card from teachers, and it earned me the nickname the Constable from my classmates. Puberty seemed to wallop me overnight. When I turned just 10 years old, none of my clothing fit right anymore. And my fundamentalist father insisted that it was time for me to go bra shopping. I felt embarrassed. Boys in my class started treating me differently, and older boys and even some men made comments to me that no 10-year-old girl should endure. I didn't entirely understand their words, but the sexual energy they were aiming at me was undeniable. You can put on the slide of WKRP, Sunny. Around that time, the TV sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati was very popular. While my parents restricted what shows we could watch, our dad didn't seem to mind this one, which may have had something to do with the blonde actress Lonnie Anderson. I had a crush on the actor who played Andy Travis, the handsome program director at the fictional radio station, and I silently willed him to appear in more scenes. The confusing part for me was when I also started feeling that way about the actress who played journalist Bailey Quarters. Could I have a crush on a man and a woman? I wasn't sure until I saw the infamous poster of Farrah Fawcett in her red bathing suit. Sunny, if you want to share that slide. I saw that at a friend's house in her brother's room. My stomach flip-flopped, and I tried not to stare too long or blush too hard. Something was definitely going on inside me, but I didn't think it was the type of thing to tell anyone, not even Jesus. Best I ignore it altogether and just stick to being a good girl. You can go back to the previous slide. Actually, go back to the slide of me with my siblings, if you would. In grade 5 at public school, the boys and girls were separated one day to watch films about how our bodies were changing. I already felt conspicuous being the only girl in grade 5 to wear a bra, and my embarrassment was compounded by the fact that my religious mother decided to attend that day to ensure that nothing too sexy was being taught. If it was possible to die of embarrassment, at that point I would have been a goner. It was hard to hide the changes my body was undergoing, and my mature looks and behavior often led people to think me far older than I was. My own innocence prevented me from seeing the danger in some situations, and I'm sad to say that I experienced sexual harassment and assault before age 13. One additional danger of purity culture, combined with patriarchy, is that children are supposed to obey authorities, even when they may be predators. Children are to keep their bodies pure and undefiled, even from sexual predators. And children are also commanded to forgive those who harm us, even our predators. I was coerced and violated by a trusted family member and also by some older boys, and I told no one until the age of 50. Then when I did inform my family, I was shamed for waiting so long to tell. When my own abuse occurred, I was just 10 years old. I was confused by what happened, as well as embarrassed and afraid because I lived with the person who had violated me. Eventually, I tired of the good girl image that now dogged me. I started wearing a jean jacket to school in grade 7, and I even tried smoking until my father found a cigarette in the pocket of that very same rebellious jean jacket when our family was out for dinner. The public humiliation that followed marked the end of my smoking habit. It was uncomfortable living in a very religious home while attending public school. Everyone else seemed to be having fun but me. My folks prohibited things like wearing tight jeans, hoop earrings, or red nail polish. I'd just like to make a point of showing you that I am actually wearing hoop earrings and I have delicious painted nails on today. I also was not supposed to spend time with boys. I felt desperate to just be normal and fit in. This was a constant tension that went on throughout much of my life. Then one lunch hour, my friend Tammy invited me over to her place. We ate lunch in her bedroom, and she wanted to read for me from a book that she'd taken from her mother's dresser drawer. It was the first time I'd been exposed to sexually explicit material, and I couldn't say I didn't like it, especially the parts about women enjoying each other. Fearing that my classmates were leading me astray, my parents sent me to a different school where I didn't know anyone. It was lonely and sad. And when my parents told me about an evangelist coming to town one evening, I thought it was at least something to do, and I agreed to go with them. At age 14, I was powerless against the slick evangelical manipulation at the religious rally. The speaker was skilled at stirring up my own feelings of guilt and fear around my changing body and sexuality, which he called my sin nature. Desperate for salvation and acceptance, I ran down to the front at the first altar call. An older girl in her late teens was waiting for me at the altar, and she took me under her wing from that moment on. She was pure and beautiful and entirely Pentecostal, and I wanted to be just like her. From that night on, I was hardly at home. Every spare moment was spent at the Pentecostal church for prayer or choir or youth group or missions fest. You name it, I participated. My favorite part was singing on the worship team. Unfortunately, my proselytizing ways grew in direct proportion to my religious zeal. At my new school, I was rarely seen without a full-size Bible tucked under my arm. I wore t-shirts with Bible verses and sang along to Christian rock on my Walkman. In short, I offended my classmates by obnoxiously trying to save their souls, and they retaliated by either ignoring or mocking me. Sometimes the mocking definitely went to bullying proportions. It was a vicious cycle perpetuated and maintained by my religious proselytizing. Unfortunately, the more I cried about being bullied for Jesus, the more I was lauded by my youth pastor and older religious friends who assured me that Christ would reward me for being persecuted in his name. At youth group, chaste feminine behavior was both expected and expounded on. I could rely on the older girls to warn me if I was ever wearing anything questionable. I remember one beach outing specifically when I was gently instructed by my older female friend that my bathing suit was too revealing, even though it was a one-piece suit. Well, I wanted to please the older girls at church by being holy. I also felt attracted to some of them, which was confusing. I knew, though, that this secret had to die with me if I was going to be pure enough for Jesus to love me and help me find a good Christian husband one day. In senior high, I transferred to yet another different school, another public school, and I drifted away from church. As religion released some of its hold on me, I was able to make secular friends and participate in more regular teen activities like roller skating and listening to popular bands. Even so, it was obvious that I came from a religious background. It was tricky navigating how to maintain sexual purity while dating teen boys. I was sometimes asked out by men, which upset my parents terribly. I knew I'd have to work to save myself, oh, there's my air quotes, for marriage sexually. I'd ended up in some compromising situations on dates, but I kept my guard up to never go all the way. I began going steady with a nice guy in my class in grade 11, and we stayed together through grades 11 and 12. I managed to keep my status as a virgin while we dated, but just barely. He knew that I wouldn't have sex until I was married, or at least not until I was 19. In British Columbia, where I live, you're considered a legal adult at age 19. And I figured if anything did happen to me, like getting pregnant, at that age, I could at least figure out what to do and not necessarily involve my parents. My high school boyfriend never pressured me, as he was also fairly innocent. But when age 19 rolled around, we both felt ready to divest ourselves of our virginal status. He used a credit card to book us a night at the Village Green Inn in a neighboring town. We didn't want to run into anyone we knew. I bought something special and lacy to wear, and he put a romantic mixtape into the boombox he'd brought along. And, well, neither of us knew what we were doing, and it was over in a few painful minutes. Not at all the fantasy I'd hoped for. But I loved this person and was confident in our future together. We'd been together for 2 years, which is forever when you're a teenager. Yeah, and then the unthinkable happened just a few months later, and he broke up with me out of the blue, just like that. Just like youth pastor warned would happen to easy girls who had sex before marriage. My mother's phrase about horny boys and men rang out in my head over and over. Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? I had given my most prized possession to this young man, my status as a virgin. He had taken it, and now I was damaged goods. Every horrifying purity metaphor came rushing back to me like a torrent. I was now a crushed rose, a piece of chewed gum, a half-eaten Oreo, a piece of paper that had been glued together with another and violently ripped apart. I was used Kleenex crumpled up on the dirty cinema floor of life. I couldn't tell my mother. She would be horrified and so disappointed in me. My non-Christian friends wouldn't understand my immense feelings of shame and guilt and hopelessness. Jesus wouldn't want me any more than my ex-boyfriend now that I was no longer pure. Desperate to prove that I was still lovable, I began spending my nights at local nightclubs. I drank and danced and hoped any young man would want to take me home. This was how I ended the 1980s and moved into the 90s, desperately seeking a young man who would love me and find me valuable. But having those hopes dashed again and again. As much as I wanted it, I failed to connect with any date beyond having casual sex. And no matter how normal or liberated I told myself that I was, I just could not shake the feeling that I was dirty. Eventually, emotional desperation drove me back to an evangelical church where a pastor informed me that Jesus forgave my sexual sin, and now I could experience secondary virginity by simply forgoing all sexual activity until marriage. I married a Christian man and was destined for a life of vanilla sex and monogamy until death, or at least until we divorced. I went on to become much more fundamentalist than my parents. I wore a head covering. I was forsaking TV, jewelry, and other worldly items. Sunny, you can put on the picture of me in my dark blue head covering. I was determined to be as holy as possible, even while our marriage was unraveling for various reasons. And you can put on the slide of me with my family there. We were the perfect family. Eventually, however, I could no longer keep my sexual beach ball underwater. The pressure of my carnal desires, of my desire just to experiment and see what it would be like to be with other women. Those desires finally erupted to the surface, and I told my husband that I wanted the freedom to explore relationships with other women. Next slide, please, of Broken Jesus. I did go on to explore many variations of sex and different types of relationships, some which proved amazing and others emotionally painful. You can put on the before and after slide of me, Sunny. I allowed myself to move in whatever direction piqued my curiosity. I was having so much fun exploring what was previously forbidden to me. Here's another picture of me, the next slide, where I was enjoying a weekend away with a lover. I was having a drink and I just felt so sexy. So that's a bit of my own experience growing up in a religious family. I went on to become much more fundamentalist than my parents, as I said. But what I want to focus on today is how failing to maintain the Christian standard of no sex before marriage left me feeling scarred and less than. I mentioned purity metaphors used in youth group to scare girls and boys into lives devoid of sexuality until marriage, as though uttering the magical incantation, "I do," could instantly undo years of teaching that sex was vile and dirty, and even thinking about sex put one in danger of the fires of hell. You may be aware of purity metaphors comparing girls who have sex to use chewing gum, a trampled rose, a half-eaten Oreo cookie or hamburger that others have partially consumed. One friend told me that all the boys in her youth group were called up to the front and invited each to take a bite of one hamburger and then drink water from the same glass, allowing the contents of their mouth to dribble into the water, which became progressively dirty. The sloppy shared hamburger and contaminated water, of course, represented a girl willing to have sex with multiple partners. The shame messaging in these metaphors is powerful. Girls who have sex are dirty and less desirable than those who refuse sex until their wedding night. While boys weren't shamed to the same degree by the purity metaphors, they were told that it was a sin to masturbate or fantasize about girls. For many, this teaching led to a sort of disconnection from their own body and an inability to enjoy sexual pleasure. When my first sexual partner broke up with me, I felt that he had taken the most valuable part of me. Kidnapping victim Elizabeth Smart also experienced this emotional devastation. At age 14, Elizabeth was stolen out of her Mormon home. In addition to the terror of being kidnapped by violent strangers, she had to contend with the loss of her sexual innocence at their hands. According to Elizabeth, the lessons of her conservative Mormon upbringing left her feeling dirty and filthy and of no value to society after she was raped at the hands of her captors. In fact, her feelings of impurity nearly prevented her from attempting to escape. Here's a direct quote related to that tragic time in her life. "I felt like my soul had been crushed. I felt like I wasn't even human anymore. How could anybody love me or want me or care about me? I felt like life had no more meaning to it, and that was only the beginning of my 9 months of captivity." Thankfully, Elizabeth was freed when police found her in March of 2003, and she is now an advocate for missing and exploited children. I wanted to talk just for a few minutes about overcoming sexual shame. Some of these might be familiar to you from the fireside chat I had with Dr. Marlene Winnell, and some of our other speakers may have touched on some of these as well. One of our first tasks in overcoming sexual shame is to disconnect our feeling of shame from our feelings of pleasure. Doing this requires us to identify the sources of our sexual shame messaging and recognize that those messages are not our own. Someone was responsible for feeding us those messages of shame, whether they did it by purity metaphors or threats of damnation. It can be helpful to write down the messages that we received about sex and sexuality, along with remembering who delivered them to us. Was it your parent or another family member, or perhaps a Sunday school or youth group leader? Wrapped up in those messages are their own messages and discomfort and issues around sex. As a child, you were the recipient of someone else's shameful messaging, and it's time to challenge those messages. In addition to writing down the shaming sex messages you received, take time to consider whether they're true or not and challenge them. Does wearing red lipstick or a miniskirt really mean you're asking for sex, or are you just enjoying a fashion trend or wearing something you like? Will experiencing an orgasm turn you into a wild nymphomaniac who seeks out sex with strangers at every opportunity? Or is it possible that you can enjoy orgasms while still maintaining your own healthy boundaries? It's important to practice self-compassion as we unpick our religious conditioning around sex. There's no need to feel guilt, shame, or fear when exploring our own sexuality. All that is required is the full and enthusiastic informed consent of our partners and ourselves. To educate yourself more fully about informed consent, I invite you to visit plannedparenthood.org. We need to work to swap out judgment for curiosity around sex. Being curious is a normal and healthy part of being human. It's responsible for us to educate ourselves about sex, which may involve reading or watching shows related to sex. You don't have to jump in at the deep end and begin consuming hardcore porn. You can start with rom-coms, and I certainly recommend Christiane Amanpour's excellent docuseries called Sex and Love Around the World. It's just a delightful show exposing viewers to how other cultures view sex and love. It's really quite sweet. Allow yourself to experiment with pleasure and feeling pleasure without judgment. This requires us to experiment with pleasure, defining it for ourselves. We want to experiment with pleasure without labeling our experiences as good or bad, just being open to the different experiences. I often tell my clients that life is like a grand buffet table, and you've got delicacies as far as the eye can see. And religious fundamentalism and purity culture in particular would have us starve to death at that buffet table. You're allowed to take a bite of everything, as long as the behavior is legal and everybody is consenting. That leaves a lot of room to explore what might pique your interest. Make pleasure your goal. With informed consent as your guide, allow yourself to do what you want rather than just what you've been told you should want. It takes time and effort to get to know ourselves, particularly if we have been shamed around pleasure, or we have the belief in our head that pleasure is not for us. Pleasure is for you. Pleasure is your birthright as a human being. We have genitalia that allows us to receive tremendous pleasure at our own hand or with the help of a partner or partners. Get to figure out what feels really good for you and know what you like. Learn about communication so that you can tell your partner, you can share with your partner what feels good for you. And also so that you can ask your partner what feels good for them, because you want to be participating in their pleasure if that's what they want. After all my exploration, I recently married again. I married a wonderful and understanding human who encourages me to enjoy my life to the fullest extent. Sunny, you can put on the final slide of Paul and I. This is all that I have prepared for my presentation today. I hope some of these ideas help you on your journey to overcome sexual shame and to enjoy sex, whether with your partners or as a solo endeavor. If you want further help unpacking harmful purity culture indoctrination, I invite you to reach out to me through my website, divorcing-religion.com. And if you have any questions about anything I've shared or any comments, I welcome you to share those as well. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Someone says that they've really enjoyed the dozen red roses in the background. Such a beautiful way to celebrate this conference with the perfect symbolism. Those came from my husband, Paul. He knew how excited I was to be hosting this event. And it's one of his love languages. I'm so lucky that he likes to give gifts and flowers or something that are especially meaningful for us both. So, yeah. I hope that through my talk and also through the other talks at this conference, it's helped to normalize sex. The idea that sex is healthy. It's just a part of everyday life. We don't have to feel any shame around sex. I loved Dr. Stephen Davidson's talk about kink and fetishes. I found that so interesting and so important. However you are is okay. It's okay to be that way. And if you're concerned and if you have questions, reach out to healthcare professionals and to mental health clinicians to help you unpack some of the beliefs that you have around sexuality. And we have a question here. Have you run into any significant challenges around the matter of bi erasure or other forms of discrimination uniquely aimed at bisexuals, either from the religious or secular side? And yes, I have experienced this myself. So the city that I live in isn't huge, so there's not a really big pool of folks in the LGBTQ community, and particularly when it comes to lesbians and bisexual women. And I have heard from some of the lesbian women that I've interacted with. I think maybe there's been some frustration as I pulled back, and I was interested in looking for other relationships as well. And then just being told that, well, being bisexual isn't really a thing. It was just a phase. You're not bisexual at all. And I found that really sad and offensive for another person to tell me what I am. I am exploring, I'm growing, I'm evolving, but I have a pretty good grip on what excites me and where my attractions lie. So I feel very comfortable referring to myself as bisexual. And my husband that I'm newly married to, he's well aware of this and just celebrates my sexuality with me. But yeah, I have definitely felt that there's been some discrimination towards bisexual females and bisexual males. Yeah. Thanks for that question. If we don't have any other questions or comments coming in, I'm comfortable with us taking our break early. And we still have a couple more wonderful presenters coming up this afternoon. We have Dr. Sarah Mosliner and Alice Gretchen are both on deck. So I think we'll take a break now and follow your schedule. We'll come back at the scheduled time. Thanks, everybody.